could.
What was invented in the Yemen was a new, private form of foreign policy for Britain, paid for by other countries' money. But then, at the very moment when Stirling's team seemed to be on the brink of success, an economic crisis hit Britain, which threatened his whole concept. In 1964, a new Labour government was elected. Almost immediately there was a run on the pound.
Mr. Brown, yes. Have you been discussing the economic situation this morning?
We've been discussing the affairs of the nation, yes.
Try the American. Have you got any money here, John Harvey?
Faced with Labour's promises of increased social spending, the markets panicked and began to pull their money out of Britain.
Sure. Nothing there at the moment.
A lot of the essential economic decisions for a government were taken externally and not inside the country at all.
And who were they taken by, those decisions?
They were taken by investors abroad deciding where to put their money, by bankers abroad deciding where to put their money, and by youngsters like the ones in this room who are speculating, sending billions of dollars across the exchanges every day in search of short-term profit.
Oui, je peux vous donner 5 millions de francs belges.
It was a battlefield with the markets. They were pressing for big increases in interest rates, increases in taxation, cuts in spending. And the markets can still do that to any country in the world.
The effect of the economic crisis was dramatic. To save the pound, Labour decided on wide-ranging spending cuts. And one of the main targets was defence. Denis Healey had been made Minister of Defence, and in early 1965 he began a series of enormous cutbacks. He closed the overseas bases and brought the troops who had once protected the Empire back home. It was a deliberate end to the idea that Britain was a great power.
I would really like to make this point very strongly. I don't think it is worthwhile spending a lot of money to try to change the course of history outside Europe or to protect national economic interests in foreign countries. We can't go on being the policeman for the whole world on our own forever.
Healey believed that instead, Britain's defence industries should make money for the country. The Americans were selling weapons throughout the world, and Healey wanted Britain to compete with them and to earn precious foreign currency. He appointed the country's most famous car salesman to advise on how to do this. He was Donald Stokes, head of Leyland Motors.
We're no longer a great world power. We're a commercial trading country now, and the sooner we appreciate this, the better. And unless we get the economy right, unless we get industry prosperous, it's no use politicians doing or thinking anything because they've no power left anymore. We've no power of armies or air forces. The only power we've got left is economic power, and we must deploy this for the benefit of us all to the best advantage to get the best return. We could be so prosperous if only we could get some sense into this.
But Britain was not very successful at selling weapons, until David Stirling decided to get involved. Stirling was furious with Healey's defence cuts. They had come at the very moment when he had finally won the war in the Yemen. In August 1965, Nasser effectively surrendered. He signed a ceasefire with the new king of Saudi Arabia, King Faisal. Nasser promised to begin withdrawing his troops from the Yemen.
We produced a situation where we'd won, where the Egyptians were prepared to pull out completely from the Yemen. They went to see King Faisal in Jeddah and agreed to go. And it was at that time that the new British government announced its intention to leave Arabia. So we'd actually won the game, which was probably why I got so cross. We'd actually won the game. And then it was given away politically because the Labour government was committed to a major defence cut.
Stirling believed that Labour had given away the fruits of his victory. By removing troops from the Middle East, they had left Saudi Arabia defenceless. Above all, with no air force. So Stirling approached King Faisal and offered to create an air force for him, privately. But first Stirling had to find the planes. To do this, he went into partnership with a flamboyant British entrepreneur who lived in Jeddah, Geoffrey Edwards. Edwards went everywhere in a white Rolls-Royce.
I live by exporting, and in many countries the Rolls-Royce is regarded as the highest possible status symbol of someone's achievements. Everyone seems to want to own a Rolls-Royce, or at least ride in one. In fact, many of my friends often say to me, the only chance I shall ever get to ride in Rolls-Royce is at my funeral in a hearse. But amongst foreigners, it does have a great effect upon them to be met by a Rolls, saying, oh, this is something, particularly to a chap you've never met before, and you're talking in terms of millions, which we often are doing in my particular game, or various games, I should say. To be met by a Rolls means to him, ah, here's a man of substance, this is a man who has something behind him, we can trust him, he's good for his word, money's good, etc., etc.
Together, Edwards and Stirling came up with an extraordinary scheme. They would persuade the British government to sell the brand new Lightning fighter to the Saudis, along with an entire defence network. And Stirling's team of ex-SAS men would help to run it. Saudi Arabia would be protected, and Britain would maintain its influence in the Middle East.
Well, the arms deal was brokered by Geoffrey Edwards and David Stirling, and the package would involve British planes, British training for the pilots, British training and, in the start, maintenance for the aircraft, and ground control, radar, and everything else. We were there prepared to give a training support, and we had already shown, in Yemen and other things, that we had been a capability of doing it.
In a private way?
In a private way.
They wanted aircraft, radar, training, and guided weapons. The Lightning was an extremely sophisticated fighter aircraft, supersonic, the first British supersonic fighter aircraft developed by English Electric, and they wanted the very latest type of fighter aircraft, and they wanted the latest type of radar. And of course there were all sorts of security problems. The attitude of the embassy in Saudi Arabia was very lukewarm. It was gaining influence through trade. But the Foreign Office had not been involved in trade. It was thought to be slightly below the salt trade. Diplomacy was tip-top.
But Dennis Healey was in favour of the deal. It was a perfect example of what he wanted the Ministry of Defence to achieve. He gave it official government support. But Stirling and Edwards were facing serious opposition from the Americans. The Lockheed Corporation were trying to sell the Saudis their Starfighter instead. They produced slick commercials to show off the plane. They also took the precaution of hiring an agent in Saudi Arabia, Adnan Khashoggi. He told Lockheed that the only way to win the deal was to bribe the Saudi government. 10 years later, in a Senate investigation, Lockheed's chairman admitted what had happened.
I'd like to ask Mr. Kaut this question. Did Mr. Khashoggi inform you personally that if Lockheed was to obtain contracts in Saudi Arabia, public officials there in a position of influence would have to be paid off?
The answer to the question is yes. He has told me on several occasions that it was necessary for him to make payments to Saudi officials, government officials.
Stirling and Edwards told the British government they would have to do the same as the Americans, pay commission to their agents in King Faisal's entourage. If they didn't, Britain would lose the deal.
Did you pay commissions to get this deal?
We paid commissions to our agents, yes.
Did you think that was wrong?
No. The agent lays out a lot of their own money, and if the deal doesn't go through, he loses his money. On that basis, I think it's a fair way of working. I knew some of the things that went on in Saudi Arabia, of course, that payments were made to people. I would not call them bribes, they were payments, a cut on the deal for people who were involved in it, and that was the custom of the country. They have different ethical standards to ourselves. For instance, people in Saudi Arabia have lots of different wives. We don't have that in this country, but it isn't a good